It's Sunday, November 8th. Welcome to a new episode of Bazaar. I'm your host Sid, and joining me today is my friend Utsav, who's also a lawyer in Delhi. And whenever I have any problem, whenever I have any issues with law, or if I have any questions regarding law, he is my go-to person. So, Utsav, welcome to the show, and it's great to have you.
Hi Siddharth, it's a pleasure being on the show again. Looking forward to a good session with you again today.
Yeah. So, the topic for today is again building on the previous episode that we did together on the antitrust hearing and the antitrust hearing that took place in Congress, where the heads of the world's most powerful companies, Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple, commonly known as the tech giants, they were questioned about their anti competitive practices in the market. And in that episode, we spoke about the findings of the committee and how each entity defended itself against each allegation. And this episode is sort of an update in which we'll be talking about the recommendations of that committee and the case filed against Google. So, if you have not heard that episode that we did previously on the antitrust hearing, do check it out. It will build a great context before you start this one. And starting this episode, you told me, when we were starting with our research, that the Congress had released some 449 page report covering everything on this antitrust hearing. What's this report all about?
Well, I must tell you there are actually two reports. So one is the 449-page report which we had discussed, which is by the majority members of the committee on the findings of the antitrust hearing. And then there's a minority report by the minority members, also termed as the Buck report, which agrees with most of the views of the majority, except in the recommendations made pursuant to their findings. So, what the majority found in this report in its 449 page one is that the tech giants are dominant in several interlinked markets and they're acting as gatekeepers, preventing smaller players from entering respective industries. Now, the combined valuation of these companies, Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple, as of September 2020, was more than 5 trillion US dollars.
Wow.
And if left, the dominance of these entities could even go to such an extent that they would own about 30% of the gross economic output in the next 10 years.
Hmm. That's a lot. I mean, 30% of the world's economic output, that's basically becoming a superpower. So, yeah. And like, again, to give a comparison, these four companies are twice the size of India's GDP. uh, I know it's not an apple to apple comparison, but that should be enough to paint a picture in your mind about how big and powerful these companies are. There's no way that you can compete with them, is there?
Well, that really is true because not only is the economy under their control, they have now uh, managed to exert their influence over institutions of press and media. And the credibility of news items is going down day after day because of these external controls.
Yeah. And like, if you're a startup, it's a nightmare going toe to toe with these tech giants.
Well, the environment for startups is such that they would think at least a couple of times before competing with any of these tech giants. Because if they do so, then venture capitalists would be wary of investing in them. Then the services offered by these giants appear to be free of cost, but they actually come at a really huge cost, which is user data. Our data, mine and yours, and anyone who is listening to our show, is being collected on a day to day basis and monetized by building consumer
Hmm.
profiles and targeting the preferences of consumers by these tech giants.
Exactly. I mean, like they say, when I was learning finance and economics, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And in today's world, data is money. So you're actually paying these companies a lot. I mean, you're not losing any money out of it, but you're giving them a lot of data, which indirectly is money for these companies. So, there's no free lunch ever.
Yes, and in fact, the financial resources that these companies have accumulated through collecting and monetizing our data is then used by them to influence lawmaking and lobbying. Lobbying is a term which refers to influencing the making of policies in government. This is something which these companies do on a day to day basis, and in fact, they have dedicated policy teams for these practices.
Yeah. So, again, these companies have a lot of power, and also at this moment, not a lot of competition, but like if I had to draw a comparison out of these four tech giants, I still feel that Amazon faces reasonable competition because Walmart is constantly breathing down its neck. In India, it faces a formidable competitor in Reliance. There's also an ongoing battle between Reliance and Amazon right now regarding the acquisition of Future Retail. We'll do a show on that on a separate note. But the other three companies, Apple, Facebook, Google, do they really have any competition? Because I feel that there's no company out there which can compete with these tech giants. And what has Congress said in its majority report regarding the practices that these companies engage in to retain their dominance in the market?
Well, I would firstly tell you that your idea about Amazon not facing competition or facing little competition isn't exactly correct, and we can come to that later. First, let me tell you about Facebook and Google, which are two of the companies which have the most antitrust related concerns. So, Facebook, for instance, snuffs out any potential competition through killer acquisitions.
Hmm.
Now, those of Instagram and WhatsApp were actually killer acquisitions, and it has tipped the market to its favor in such an extent that now the only competition it faces is from its own products, such as Instagram and WhatsApp. So they have basically they have basically totally got rid of external competitors.
We have to hand it to Mr. Zuckerberg because this guy knows how to stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah, Mr. Zuckerberg's quite a genius, but you can't also underestimate Sundar Pichai, who's brought Google to the levels that it is. I mean, it was also there before him, but he has contributed, and the dominant position that Google occupies, if you look at it, is influences the online ad market. In this ad market, it either shows ads to promote itself or that of paid users. So hence it accumulates resources in this manner also. And it uses its own products such as Google Chrome to control the market. It is also mandated that all Android smartphones have the Google Play Store pre-installed. And then it has the players who are selling their apps on the Google Play Store basically pay hefty commissions for this. So in this way, it's all these products and mechanisms of Google are interlinked to consolidate its power in the market.
Yeah, I mean, the App Store commissions have been in the news, regarding Apple also. Like, if you remember the Epic Games issue that was ongoing, and we'll talk about the trouble that's brewing for Google in some time. But, out of these four companies, I really feel that Google is the most powerful and it operates as a pure monopoly. It's got insane power, Google.
Definitely, definitely. Google is one of the largest. And now if you look at even Apple, so Apple has a policy similar to Google in that in the Apple Store on Apple devices, it preferences its own apps, and then it also charges hefty commissions from the app developers. So that way they're all following similar policies.
Yeah, I remember that. Again, like the 30% commission that Apple charges from its app developers, it's a serious bite for app developers. And we've seen in recent times how Epic Games went guns blazing against Apple for its in-app purchase policies. There was also talks in India about how companies like Paytm and other startups, they want to basically come out and create a different app store to avoid this commission. But it's a long road ahead. I mean, to replace Google and Apple App Store, it's a long road ahead. It's a difficult thing to do.
I agree with you. It is indeed difficult because these companies are huge, and although these smaller companies who are slowly gaining track and momentum are taking steps to counter these huge influence by these companies, it's still a long way to go. And now coming back to your views on Amazon. So Amazon has some of the most predatory practices. It sells its own products on the platform where external buyers are selling their products, and then it also collects their data to find out about them and either buy them out or eliminate them ruthlessly from the market.
Yeah, Amazon. I mean, I was talking about the competition that it faces in Walmart and Reliance, but yeah, globally, everyone is scared of Amazon. Like, if you see Jeff Bezos or if you see Amazon entering into a market, you know that he enters a market to become the number one player in that market. So Yeah, it's difficult to compete with them. And talking about competition, I think Apple and Facebook also might face a little bit of fight back from emerging startups, because Apple is increasingly focusing on increasing its services revenue, because it knows how difficult it is to continuously innovate a physical product. And Facebook also will continue to face competition from companies like Snapchat, TikTok. Again, TikTok is it's facing issues on its own, but it's competition is there for Facebook as well. But again, like you said, Facebook is notorious for acquiring its competitors. If Zuckerberg cannot compete with you, he'll just buy you. And over time, I think this becomes a vicious circle, and we caught in a loop.
Well, definitely, and in order to defeat that loop, the Congress committee has recommended a series of measures. So the majority members have recommended that these entities be prohibited from entering into adjacent lines of business. Now, this is similar to what is there in Section 4, Clause 2, Clause E of the Competition Act in India, which prevents entities from using their dominant position in one market to enter into and control another market. So what basically happens here is that if, for instance, you are in a particular product line where you're already dominant, and there is something which is a closely interrelated product in
Hmm.
another line of business, so use your dominant position in this market to also enter that market. It's basically leveraging the resources and power that you have. And the majority report further says that these entities should not be allowed to impose discriminatory conditions on competitors selling their apps on the platform, such as commission that Google Play Store and Apple's Play Store demand from app developers. They also want to develop interoperability and data portability so that users can switch platforms without losing data. So now interoperability is again a concept like you're already used to using Facebook a lot, and there's a lot of data that you have on Facebook. But if you want to switch on to another app which offers the same things that Facebook does, but you will be wary of losing your data. So interoperability measures can help reduce the loss of that data. And further, the committee most importantly recommended that any acquisitions or startups by these tech giants should be presumed to be anti-competitive. The legal presumption should operate against them as per the committee. Apart from all this, they feel that the budgets of the enforcement agencies such as FTC should be increased, and that news publishers should be provided safe harbor so that they can report against these enterprises without fear, and so that we can have freedom of press once again.
So to summarize, what you're saying is that what this majority report is saying is that you cannot enter similar lines of business. You should not charge high commissions. You should allow full transferability of data. And this is very surprising for me. Any acquisition that you make is going to be anti competitive. I mean, that would be like telling Sachin in his prime days that you can't score a century. That's, I think that defeats some level of purpose of why these entities are operating in some place. I think that's a bit harsh, but who am I to say? But either ways, these are all recommendations, isn't it? I mean, as of now, you can't take any legal action against these companies, so life goes on. And you mentioned that there's also some minority report. What does that say, and how many reports are there in total, dude?
So, so Siddharth, there's basically two reports, the majority and the bug report or minority report. And bug report is they have views similar to actually what you have here, and that killer acquisitions is an extreme term, and that any acquisition cannot be deemed to be a killer acquisition. So the minority has recommended that scrutiny should be conducted before terming any acquisition as anti-competitive. And further, the bug report says that strong action against monopolistic behavior is a good idea hypothetically, but but as per Buck report, majority hasn't taken into account the jurisprudence in the US, which shows that the onus lies on these agencies to prove that there's anti-competitive behavior, and the burden of proof is pretty high. So the Buck report says that these giants cannot be altogether barred from entering adjacent lines of business either. And all in all, they don't agree with the hard mandates of the majority and think that there should be a proper level of scrutiny before these measures are imposed.
Yeah, because I feel that however big these companies are, if you like the point about the acquisition, if you stop these acquisitions, then the entire ecosystem can fall apart, because these four companies are the companies that really make the acquisitions, the big acquisitions. They fund these startups, and the entire ecosystem could be shaken away, like if you stop those acquisitions. So I think that's a bit harsh, but I feel that all these reports, you can release all the reports that you want, but is that going to change anything? Because the only way real change ever happens is through action. And on that front, I think the Department of Justice did not disappoint, did they?
Well, I'm not surprised that the Department of Justice took this action against Google, because if you look at the decisions of the European courts, or European Court of Justice, and other courts, even individual courts of different countries in Europe, many have imposed heavy fines on Google and taken serious action in the past as well.
Yeah, I mean, so just to break it down, the Department of Justice has filed an antitrust lawsuit against Google, saying that the company prevents consumers from accessing other search engines. And Google and Sundar Pichai, they need to prove that they don't unfairly dominate the online search engine market, which is going to be a hell of a task. Because let me ask you this question: how many other search engines can you think apart from Google that come to your mind?
Well, Bing and Yahoo are a few that come to mind, though one can't help but set Google as their default search tool.
Exactly my point, because uh, I had a terrible experience every time I have used Bing. First of all, I've never used Bing willingly, because it's on certain browsers, it's the default search engine. So just when I'm searching, when I'm making that first search, Bing pops up, and I really don't like its user interface and the experience. So keeping that in mind, you just can't compete with Google, because their services are the best. And that's really what it is. I mean, Google is providing the best service out there. So and that's what Sundar and Google is coming out and defending themselves, that we are not unfairly dominating the market, we are just providing what the user wants. And it's so deeply rooted in our minds. I don't think we can comprehend switching our search engines, because Google is the default setting in our brains.
Well, in fact, recently in October, after the antitrust hearing by Congress concluded, the Department of Justice, along with attorney generals of 11 states, filed a civil lawsuit against Google in Columbia District Court to take action against Google for its anti competitive practices, thus bringing to light the exclusionary and one sided agreements that these smaller businesses were being forced to enter into with Google, which has a 90% market share in search and search advertising for many years. So the very idea of, yeah, not being able to switch away from Google is because of the kind of presence that this company has established for itself over so many years, and they have only been able to do so through these practices, which, as per the law, are anti-competitive.
Yep. And one of the biggest revelations while I was doing the research was the deal between Apple and Google, because not many people know this, but Google pays Apple around 8 to 12 billion dollars annually for building Google's search engine into its products. So that's probably the single largest payment Google makes to any of its suppliers. And this is money that Apple would not want to walk away from. Nearly half of Google's search traffic comes from Apple devices. And according to the Department of Justice, losing the Apple deal would be a code red situation in Google. So if this deal falls apart, then it's not a fun time.
Well, definitely, because the payment made by Google to Apple is huge. It accounts for around 14 to 21% of Apple's annual profit. And this sheds light on the fact that not only are these companies taking measures on their own to curtail competition, they're actually working hand in glove like a parallel coalition government to
Hmm.
retain their hold over the market. And the DOJ has approached the courts for an injunction against Google to prevent it from continuing this practice, targeting specific deals like the one you just discussed, which in order to combat Google's monopoly.
It's funny. Let's for one moment believe that the Department of Justice is able to pull the plug, and let's say Google loses the Apple deal. Now obviously Apple would not be very happy about it, because it just lost access to easy money. But it will be catastrophic for Google, because this might actually push Apple to build their own search engine. And people working for Google believe that Apple might be the only player in the world, the only company in the world that can actually compete with Google head to head when it comes to search engine. So if the Department of Justice probably makes this deal go south, if the deal does not hold good, then I think Google is in trouble. What do you think?
Well, I think your idea about Apple being the only potential competitor in search engines is probably based on the fact that just like Google has control over Android devices in terms of pre-installation of search tools, similarly, Apple also has control over the iOS devices. And but if you still look at it, there's always been other search engines around, and merely merely restricting making Google the default search engine won't change everything. Other search engines also have to measure up to the standards of quality that Google has had. However, Google might have achieved it, but they'll have to match those standards.
Definitely, because I don't think, like, even if this deal does not take place, like, even if Google is not my default search engine, if let's say Yahoo or Bing is my default, but I'm not gonna use it. I'm gonna change it to Google because Google is so much more easier to use, and they have just created the best product out there. So it's gonna be difficult, and probably, some, like you said, something really radical has to take place. Probably a search engine which can compete with Google and provide the same level of service that Google does. But again, because Google is so powerful, that's something which is very difficult for startups and for other search engines to match that level of service that Google gives. So it's still very early days, but this lawsuit filed by DOJ really got to have sent shivers down the spine of Sundar Pichai and Google's top management. And it can also be seen as an indirect warning to the other three big tech firms, because they could very well be next on the Department of Justice radar, right? Because if probably a landmark case against Google might force these companies to rethink their practices and probably force them to be on the right side of the law. What do you think?
Well, it's not the first time that Google has faced legal action, but the fact that it is now on home turf may shake up not only Google but even these other companies, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple. And because it's a different thing when you have a case filed against you in say Europe or India, and which has happened a lot of times with the competition tribunals of these countries, and also with international courts like the ECJ. But to have something like this happen on home turf will definitely shake them up.
Hmm, that's true. Let's see what happens. I mean, I'm pretty excited. I am expecting something radical to take place because, I mean, come on, the power has to shift, right? It cannot be concentrated among these four big giants, and something has to happen now.
Yes, I mean, considering the fact that these apps are ingrained into our day-to-day lives, so a major change is needed. And although Siddharth, there's one thing that we haven't yet covered. So this is something I'd like to ask you, since you're the financial whiz that I know, being a CA and interested in finance. Tell me about how the hearing and these findings has impacted the share market and the overall world economy, and what's the effects going to be in the future?
So, honestly, not one thing. There's no single one thing that affects the markets. There are a lot of factors that move the market. Currently, as we all know, US elections are the ones that are moving the market, because if you see in the past 3 4 days, it has been insane. The markets have been very volatile, and Indian markets, if you see, they have just shot up shot up insanely. Like I was surprised that the markets went this up. But so it's hard to say what the impact of this hearing will be on the markets, on the world economy, because it's difficult to quantify the effect of that. But the only company that can be immediately impacted is Google, because if it loses the Apple deal, it would be a big blow for it. And how deeply it would be impacted is still hard to say. The numbers are not there with us. So that is something that could happen in the future. But currently, Google's stock price has been unaffected by all of this. So this shows you that the investors in Google, they are pretty confident that Sundar Pichai and the top level management at Google, they will write this thing out. It will not be that easy, but they're pretty confident in the company. And the past track record says that Google has been able to manage this stuff very easily. So that's something. And even if we talk about the other three big tech companies, their stock has been relatively stable. It has been volatile in the past 1 month, but it has been stable. There's no big price movement. But it will be interesting to see what happens to these big tech companies if the lawsuit goes against Google. That is when things will get really interesting, because then these other three companies also will have to be on their toes, because they if they make any mistake, then the government and the Department of Justice might be coming after them. So it's all in the future. We cannot quantify the effect right now, but it's interesting to see what happens if things go bad for Google.
Well, definitely, Siddhartha, and it's been a pleasure being on your show again. You're a great host,
Hmm.
and I'm looking forward to more such sessions. And this whole topic is in fact very interesting and a very good follow-up to our previous episode on competition law and the antitrust hearing, because over here it's basically not only the ongoing hearing, but it's the findings which the committee had in its report, and which are going to have major implications on not only the US economy, the world economy, especially now with the new political establishment coming in after the elections. So let's see how these measures are implemented by the government and by the agencies in the US.
Definitely. I mean, we should probably do a follow-up show of on this one. Probably whenever we have more material, whenever we have more updates. But again, Utsav, it was a pleasure having you on the show. And every time I have anything related to the law or anything related to policies and stuff, you are the person that I go to. So it's a pleasure talking to you, and I hope to have you back on the show soon.
For sure, for sure. Cheers. Looking forward to more such sessions.
All right, guys, that does it for today's edition of Bazaar. People on the show may have certain recommendations to buy or sell, but don't buy or sell based on what you hear. Do your own research before you take any investing decision. You can reach out to us at thebazaarpodcast at gmail.com. We would love to know what you think of the show, and how we can improve the quality of the content, and what we can do to make this a better listening experience. So just have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.